Hey guys, grab a Bible and let's talk for a minute about marriage in heaven. Jesus said some pretty shocking things to some people who questioned him one day. Let's take a look at it in Matthew 22, starting at verse 23. The same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him, saying, Teacher, Moses said that if a man dies, having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. Now, there were with us 7 brothers. The first died after he had married, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. Likewise the second also, and the third, even to the 7th. Last of all, the woman died also. Therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For they all had her. Jesus answered and said to them, You are mistaken, not knowing the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels of God in heaven. But concerning the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the multitudes heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. Amazing stuff Jesus gives us here in response to the Sadducees. The Sadducees, we're told here, they don't believe there is a resurrection. They didn't believe in life after death. And in another place, we learned that they also didn't believe in angels or spirits. And Jesus just blows all 3 of those out of the water with his answer because he speaks about the resurrection as fact. He mentions angels as fact. And he talks about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob being alive, not dead. And that means they're alive in the spirit, right? Their bodies are buried. They know where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried, but they're not dead. They're alive. And so with one swoop, Jesus just kicks the legs out of everything the Sadducees believe here. It's an amazing answer. So the question that they ask, it is true in the Old Testament that this was a law, and that if a man married a woman and he died and they didn't have kids, then his brother was supposed to raise up kids for his wife. And that really seems strange to us, but it wasn't a big deal to them. You know, we've really come a long way in our view of sexuality, and so this wasn't a big deal to them, the godly people back then, and there were good reasons for it, to perpetuate the name of the family, to keep property in the family, things like that. A great example of this is found in the book of Ruth. It really is a beautiful story. How Ruth was redeemed by Boaz, who was her kinsman, and he married her, and actually they are grandparents of Jesus. God chose to use them in the line to Christ. It's a beautiful story, and really is an illustration of the fact that Jesus is our Redeemer. He's the one who came and bought us back. But the way these guys ask it, they're making a mockery of it because they think they're making a mockery of the resurrection and in turn making a mockery of Jesus, but they're not. I'm sure it never happened that a woman married 7 brothers and they all died and didn't have any kids. They're trying to make a point by exaggeration, and people do that all the time. But Jesus' answer is what I want to focus on because it's incredible. And verse 29, Jesus answered and said to them, You are mistaken, not knowing the Scriptures nor the power of God. And isn't that true? Isn't that how we all make our mistakes today? When we're wrong about something, when we're wrong in our thinking or wrong in our beliefs, it's because we don't know the Scriptures. And isn't it true that when we are afraid or more anxious or doubting, it's because we're not trusting the power of God. And so we make the same mistake today that they did. They were mistaken not knowing the scriptures nor the power of God. And verse 30, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels of God in heaven. But concerning the resurrection of the dead, have ye not read what was spoken to you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And we know that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were in heaven right at this time. We have eyewitnesses. Just back in chapter 17, when Jesus was transfigured on the mountain, chapter 17, verse 1, now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. So, we know that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are alive. They're in heaven. We see Moses and Elijah appeared. Everyone knew that Moses, his body was buried on a mountain somewhere. God buried his body. Actually, it says at the end of Deuteronomy. But there Moses is. He's alive. His spirit, his soul is in heaven, even though his body is in the ground. So Jesus blows up the resurrection, the false belief they had about the resurrection, for sure, that there is life after death. Now, in verse 30, I want to focus on verse 30 for the rest of our time here. He says, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels of God in heaven. Now, I don't understand everything about heaven. I don't understand everything about how or what we will be like in heaven, because we're going to be changed. But I think we can learn a lot by thinking about some of the things that Jesus didn't say here. For example, he says that we'll be like angels of God in heaven. Now, he did not say we will be angels. We're not going to turn into angels in heaven. We're still going to be us. And I give the Moses and Elijah example. They're in heaven and they're still Moses and Elijah. And there will come a day where their bodies are resurrected and their soul will meet their resurrected bodies again. But they'll still be Moses and Elijah. And they will still have the body of a man, but it'll just be perfect. In 1 John chapter 3, it says that when we see Jesus, we'll be like him. We're going to be us, and we're going to have bodies, but they're going to be perfected bodies, like the body of the resurrected Christ. Okay? The only thing that's going to be different about us is that we'll be incorruptible and immortal. No more sin, no more death. Otherwise, we're going to be us, just made perfect. We won't be angels. In fact, one of the jobs we're going to have in heaven, it says in 1 Corinthians 6, is that we will judge angels. I don't know what that's going to be like, but that sounds intense. So we won't become angels. We'll be like them. What does that mean? We'll be like angels in the sense that he connects it here. We won't be married or given in marriage. Now, angels don't marry one another, and they don't have kids. Okay? One of the important reasons that God instituted marriage was so that we would be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That's what he told Adam and Eve back in Genesis chapter 1. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. In another place, in Malachi, which is the book right before Matthew, Malachi chapter 2, verse 14 and 15, God is talking about marriage, and it says, did he not make them one? Right? In marriage, the two become one. Okay, so he made them one, and then it says, why? one. Why did he make them one? And the answer is he seeks godly offspring. That's Malachi 2:15. He seeks godly offspring. So one of the important things about marriage is reproduction and raising children to believe in God. And that won't be necessary in heaven. We won't be having kids in heaven. In that way, that's how we'll be like angels. There are no baby angels. I know you see pictures of little cupids or whatever shooting arrows and making people fall in love, but there's no baby angels in heaven. Angels are not reproducing. There's a set number, and that number is not going to change. So in that way, we'll be like angels. We won't be having kids in heaven. And when we're made perfect, and we don't have this flesh any longer, we won't have a sex drive. We won't have things like that that will be pulling at us from the flesh. All of that will be done away with. So that's how we'll be like angels. Now, something else Jesus doesn't say. He doesn't say that we won't know each other. So I want to think about that for a minute by turning to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Let's see, 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. 1 Corinthians 13:8. Love never fails. But whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know, just as I also am known. And now abide faith, hope, and love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. So in his discussion about love, he takes us from the now to the then. Okay? And he's teaching us how important love is. But at the same time, he gives us a lot of important information about then. When is then? Then is, in verse 10, when that which is perfect has come. When Jesus comes. He's the one that's perfect, right? Then that which is in part will be done away. And right now he says we know in part and we prophesy in part, right? So we don't know everything now. There's so much that's hidden from us. There's so much that we can't understand. There's so much that's a mystery. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away with, which is, one thing he's talking about is our knowledge. Our knowledge. Our knowledge right now is in part. But then when he comes, it'll be made complete. Okay? And he compares it to the difference between thinking like a child and thinking as a man. Right? And when I was a child, I understood and I thought differently than I do as a man. I put away childish things. Okay? And that's the comparison he's making as what we know now and what we'll know then. It's the difference between a child and a grown man. It's a very cool illustration. Now this verse 12 is so important. This was one of the first verses that I memorized because it was a question my wife and I had asked our first pastor whether we would know people in heaven. And this is what he quoted to us. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. So what does that mean? Speaking of then, right? Now we know in part, but then I shall know. How does God know me right now? God knows everything about me right now. Psalm 139, he knows my sitting down, my rising up. He knows my thoughts afar off. He knows my heart. He knows everything about me. Now, this verse says that someday I'll know like that. I'll know like that. It's important to understand when you get to heaven, you won't have less knowledge. You'll have more knowledge. The things that are in part will be done away with, and your knowledge will be made complete. We'll know all the mysteries. And more importantly, not more importantly, but just as important, we'll know each other even better. We will know each other the same way God knows us now. That's what verse 12 is saying. I will know just as he knows me. And so, when you think about marriage in heaven, you're still going to know your spouse. And the cool part is you're going to know them better than you ever knew them before, right? We know our spouses now. We know each other's habits. We know each other's thoughts. We can finish each other's sentences sometimes. We know what each other likes and don't likes. We know those things, but even still our knowledge of each other is incomplete, right? Because sometimes we know better and we don't meet needs, right? There's just something we know that's there that makes it incomplete. But that will be done away with, and we'll know each other perfectly. I'm going to know my wife in heaven, and I'm going to know her better than I know her now, and same her with me. That's great news. That's great news. I was reading, I want to read this quote for you. Someone asked a preacher this question: will I know my loved ones in heaven? And his answer was great. He said, I do not expect to be a greater fool in heaven than I am here, and I know my loved ones here. What a great answer. I guess the difficult part about that is there will be people that we know and love here that won't be there. I think that's the hardest part about this. But I believe that the Bible teaches clearly that after our knowledge is made complete and all the mysteries are solved, and we understand everything perfectly, we understand what God has done and why he did it, I think we'll be able to look him in the eye and say he was right. And there will come a day after everything is sorted out that all of the things that happened before won't be remembered anymore. It's there's a verse that says that in Isaiah 65. Let's see. Isaiah 65:17. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered or come to mind. And that's a difficult thought. But hey, we won't be having kids in heaven, but the thing is we're trying to fill heaven now by reaching people. And so don't give up. Don't give up on people. But we're going to know each other in heaven. And the great thing about this also, not only will we know each other, but we'll love each other better than we ever did before. And he says, now abide faith, hope, and love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. So you think about it, in heaven, faith won't be necessary because we're going to see everything that we believed with our eyes. Hope won't be necessary because you don't hope for things that you can see right in front of you. So faith and hope will be gone, but love will continue. Love will still be there. And when we've put off these bodies and we're incorruptible and no longer walking in the flesh, we are going to love better than we ever loved before. And I don't know about you, but I wish that I loved my wife better. And there are things that I do that I wish I didn't, so that I could show my love better to my wife. And you probably feel the same way. But there, we're going to love better than before. And think about this. We're going to know not only our spouses, but we're going to know everyone there the way we are known now. And we're going to love everyone there perfectly. And so, I don't know how the relationships are all going to work, right? But we just got to trust the power of God that if there's no marriage there, we're just going to be able to love everyone perfectly. It's powerful stuff. An important thing that I thought about as I was going over all this is that, what is marriage about here? And the truth is, marriage here is an illustration of the relationship between Christ and the church. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is head of the wife, as also Christ is head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. And then Paul quotes Genesis in verse 31 of Ephesians 5. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Incredible thoughts that marriage is an illustration of the relationship between Christ and the church. Okay? So Christ, he loves the church, right? We know that because he laid down his life for her. We know that Christ loves the church because he continues to wash and cleanse her, and so that he can present her to God without spot or wrinkle. Now, husbands, that's your position in the marriage relationship. You are to love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of and water by the word. Just as Christ leads the church, we're supposed to lead our families spiritually to help them know the Lord and grow in the Lord and love the Lord so that they'll be in heaven. That's our job as husbands. Wives are in the role of the church to submit to their husbands as to the Lord, right? Now, Christ loved us first, right? And because of his love for us, we honor and submit to him because he loved us first. The wives are in that position as their husbands provide leadership, spiritual leadership, as they show love to the wife. The wife is to submit to their husband's leadership and to show respect for their husband. Now, I know that this is the ideal, right? This is the goal. We want to play this out perfectly. And this is why the family comes under such attack by the world, because if you can pervert the image of the family, you can pervert the image of Christ in the church. That's why I think this is so important. Now we don't love perfectly yet, right? We just talked about that. And so we're trying, this is the ideal. Husbands, we want to do better. Wives, we want to do better. And now I want to give you some application, right? Because the husband is to love the wife. Now the husband's temptation, great temptation in marriage, is to become bitter toward the wife. Colossians 3:19. Husbands, love your wives and do not be bitter toward them. The temptation for husbands is to, when we get frustrated or we get upset with our wife, is to shut down and to not speak. Okay? But we got to fight through that because our job as husbands is to lead and to teach the spiritual things to our family. And so we can't shut down and not speak. You know, and if we do this right, in love, then our wives and our children will follow our spiritual leadership. And we're not lording ourselves over them, but we're leading by example. And we can't shut that down. They need that from us. They need that from us. We're the picture of Christ to our wives and to our children. I think about the verse in Proverbs a lot, that the glory of children is their father. We have a role to fulfill here, and we can't get bitter and shut down and not allow that to happen. So we got to forgive. We got to forgive our wives, and we got to be patient with them. Just as Christ forgives us and is patient with us. Now, wives, your temptation is different. If you get upset or frustrated with your husband, your temptation is to talk too much. Okay? And I say that in love. I'm not trying to be funny or anything. That really is the temptation, because Peter says here, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1, wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives. And so the temptation here, this is why Peter says this, the temptation here is to nag your husband, right? That's why he says if you want to win your husband, the way to do it is without a word, leading by example. Because if your husband is down, if your husband is bitter, okay, all the words in the world probably aren't going to help. Getting on his case and continuing to tell him that he's wrong is not going to help. So how do we fix it? Well, the way we fix it is each of us have to be obedient to what we were called to do. Okay? So husbands, the conduct of your wives doesn't change the fact that you were commanded to love them. So you love them no matter what. Wives, the conduct of your husband doesn't change the fact that you were called to respect them and submit to them. And so you have to do that no matter what. You honor and respect and even serve. And I think when each of us do our part, or even when one of us do our part, it will change the situation. God will use it. God will use it to change the heart of the other person. And it's so important that we fight for our marriages because they're an illustration of Christ and the church. If you go back to Matthew 22, real quick, I just want to say there is one marriage in heaven. And in 22 verse 1, it says this, and Jesus answered and spoke to them again by parable and said, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son. It's awesome to think about. The ancient ritual of marriage to the Jews was really cool. The groom-to-be would go and offer, if there was a woman that he wanted to marry, he would go and offer a price to the father of that woman. And if the father accepted the price, then the groom-to-be would then leave, and he would go and prepare a place for him and his bride to live together. And then the bride had to be ready to go when the groom came back, because he could come at any time. And when he would come back, he would start, at one end of the city, and he would start shouting. And and he would have friends with him, and they would be shouting, saying, "The bridegroom is coming. The bridegroom is coming." And the shouting would just continue through the streets, and it would get to the bride's house, and she would know that the groom was on his way to take her, and he would take her, and he would take her back to the place that he had prepared for them to live together. And it's a picture of Christ. Jesus came, and he paid the price to the Father which was his own body on the cross, paying for our sins. The Father accepted that price. We know that because Jesus rose from the dead. That proves that God accepted the price. And then Jesus left. And before he left, he said, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself so that where I am, you can be also. And so here we are. We're waiting for the groom to come. The church is waiting. We're the bride of Christ. And it says in Thessalonians that he's going to come with a shout, with the voice of an archangel and with the trumpet of God. I don't know what he'll shout. Maybe he'll shout, the bridegroom is coming. And he's going to take us, the church, to be with him where he is, where he's prepared a place for us to live. And all of us will be clothed in fine linens, bright and white, as we're married to the bridegroom, to Jesus Christ. And then we'll enjoy the marriage supper of the Lamb together with him. So we're all going to know each other. We're all going to love each other. But us as a group, we're going to be given to Christ, married to him, and we'll spend eternity with him, enjoying that relationship forever. Hopefully this helps you guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you later. Bye.